By early November 1942, the U.S. fleet had been reduced considerably in offensive power. The carriers Wasp and Hornet had been sunk, leaving just the aircraft carrier Enterprise, the battle carrier Kearsarge, and battleships Washington and South Dakota as the only capital ships available to Allied forces fighting in the Guadalcanal campaign. Wait, that's not right. What's a battle carrier?
With the signal of departure comes a sudden change of mood. The vessel is not moved, but the passenger already is part of a new world, as if he were miles away from the old.
At the peak of his career in the 1940s and 50s, William Francis Gibbs was considered to be America's best naval architect. Best known for his lifelong passion project, the ocean liner SS United States, a ship that, when completed in 1952, was hailed as a technological masterpiece. Founded in 1922, with Daniel H. Cox, Gibbs and Cox would go on to become the largest private ship design firm in the world. In the late 30s, Gibbs was commissioned to design a ship that at the time had features and scale that the world hadn't seen before. Affectionately named Kearsarge by World of Warships, the ship in question is referred to as Project 1058.1. To William Francis Gibbs, it was Ship X, a ship which seemed to be the work of pure fantasy. Gibbs's design envisioned an enormous ship some 1,000 feet long, with 4 triple-gun turrets mounting 16-inch, .45 caliber rifles, of the type used in the North Carolina and South Dakota-class battleships, as well as a 402-foot-long flight deck mounted amidships, in place of a traditional superstructure. An island conning tower and funnel were offset to starboard like an aircraft carrier. The ship was from the keel up, a hybrid carrier battleship, unlike the converted Issei-class battleships of the Imperial Japanese Navy. What inspired such a design? Was it a fantasy? The twisted imaginings of an eccentric ship designer run wild? To understand why this ship was being designed, we need to go back to the Soviet Union in the early 1930s. When Stalin declared that the Soviet Union would arrive on the global stage with a new modern navy with state-of-the-art battleships at its core, there were a few problems, to say the least. Russia had not built a battleship since the Tsarist period, and its industry was not up to the task of manufacturing steel for armor and guns, which was necessary for, at that time, a modern battleship, let alone a whole fleet of them. At the time, there were only a handful of countries who possessed the means to build modern battleships. For various political reasons, Japan, Germany, and Great Britain were excluded. Italy and the United States would serve as the primary resources for Soviet naval designs during the interwar period. With the fascist governments of Italy and Germany aligning, the Soviets turned solely to the United States for warships acquisition. Beginning in 1936, the Karp Import and Export Company, led by Sam Karp, a naturalized American citizen and brother-in-law of Vyacheslav Molotov, Stalin's confidant and the Soviet Minister of Foreign Affairs, was tasked to procure the necessary components and materials from the United States. President Roosevelt, whose election brought official recognition of the Soviet Union in 1933, seemed to signal his support. But after a year and a half of political and bureaucratic roadblocks, especially from the U.S. Navy, Karp had little to show for his work. American leadership, for example, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral William D. Leahy, who, while serving as the commanding officer of USS St. Louis in the Black Sea in 1918, had witnessed the flood of Russian refugees fleeing Bolshevik terror, could not, it seems, decide whether helping the Soviet Union build warships of any kind, much less battleships, would benefit the U.S. in any way. Many thought not. Frustrated, Karp approached Gibbs and Cox, the largest private naval architecture firm in the world, in August 1937. Carp asked Gibbs to design a ship of unmatched scale and capability, which he believed could control the seas for many years to come. Gibbs set to work designing what he thought would be the ultimate battleship, a ship with heavy armor, numerous main battery guns, and the aviation facilities of an aircraft carrier. Therefore, the ship would also need to possess sufficient length to beam and equivalent shaft horsepower to achieve a top speed greater than 30 knots. Numerous drafts for Ship X were created, but Plan B was finally settled upon. The vessel contemplated in Plan B would displace more than 62,000 tons, 74,000 tons fully loaded. By comparison, the design displacement of the North Carolina-class battleships was 35,000 tons. Only the Yamato class of battleships would be heavier in displacement. To accommodate such a Leviathan, U.S. dockyards would need to be expanded at Soviet expense. Additionally, the Navy required Gibbs and Cox to provide it with their designs. Appeased for the moment, the Navy allowed the project to go ahead. The U.S. government wished to build 2 complete ships and provide the materials for a third, but the negotiation only served to delay the project. In the end, bureaucrats opposed to working with the Soviet government obtained Roosevelt's decision to halt any further work, the stated reason being that building these ships would be in violation of the tonnage restrictions of the Washington Naval Treaty and could be seen by Japan and Germany as a threat. The suggestion that Stalin's government might purchase treaty-limited 35,000-ton ships designed by Gibbs and Cox was disingenuous at best. In the end, though, this was not to be. Plans purchased from the U.S. and Italy would inspire Soviet naval architects to produce a design of their own, which became the Sovietsky Soyuz class, with 4 hulls ordered in 1938. However, with the outbreak of war in 1939 and the German invasion in 1941, these ships would never be completed and ultimately scrapped after the war. We only can speculate about what might have happened had the ships not been delayed. Had the first ship been laid down in 1938, it could have been nearing completion by late 1941. No doubt that it would have ended up serving in the U.S. Navy, as the Soviet Navy was incapable of taking delivery and supporting such a ship by this time. And that being the case, how might the U.S. Navy have used such a ship? Kearsarge may have protected convoys headed to Great Britain or the Soviet Union with its high speed, heavy guns, and aircraft. In the Pacific, Kearsarge may have provided a stopgap measure during the early war, when carriers and fast battleships were in short supply? Or was the design too inherently flawed to be useful? The flight deck would be too small to operate late-war aircraft, and the deck also impeded main battery firing angles. We can only speculate what this monster of the seas would have done in World War II